Philosophy professor Dr. Esther Meek once wrote these words about the process of how we come to know others better. We attend to his or her ways so that we can come to identify patterns, signature moves I call them. What are distinctive, reliable, delightful ways that that person has of operating? My theologian friend, she writes, Mike Williams argues in As Far as the Curse is Found, the Covenant Story of Redemption, that this approach of identifying patterns is how we should understand how the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, promises Christ. God sets the pattern of redemption with Noah and then with the Exodus, so that when Jesus comes, we will recognize God's ways. Study God's ways as the relationship unfolds, not so that you can predict the future, but so that you will recognize God when he shows up. Expect to be surprised, but also expect, if you've attended to him in love, to recognize him. The Bible is the unfolding drama of the covenant relationship between God and his people. And when you read it, you attend carefully so that you get to know God, so that you will know his signature moves, so that you will experience them in your own life. Shortly after his resurrection, Jesus caught up with two of his disciples who were traveling along a road to a town called Emmaus. And while he was walking right beside them, he talked to them about his life and death and resurrection. Even as he was right there with them, they were, according to the scripture, kept from recognizing him until Jesus opened their eyes via a few signature moves. First, he spoke to them about the Old Testament and how everything that was written in the Old Testament was really pointing to him, to this kind of event, this kind of story playing out. A Jesus who was like the one they knew. And as Jesus spoke, his disciples' hearts burned within them. Something more was going on. And you've probably had that something more is going on feeling in your life, maybe in church, but maybe in other places in your life, taking in the most amazing vista after you've hiked up a mountain, or caught up in the most eloquent story, or hearing that piece of music for the first time and just being floored, or maybe holding a newborn child. And you just know that there is something more going on in that moment than just those circumstances, more than meets the eye or the ear or your rational mind. It's like you're on the edge of something, on the edge of a kind of glory. After Jesus unpacked the Old Testament with those two Emmaus-bound disciples, he then got to the town and they invited him in for a meal, and he shared a meal with them, and he, quote, took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. And as he reenacted the ritual of breaking bread, their eyes were opened. And they were able to see, in a way that maybe they've never seen before, who Jesus really was, the one who made their eyes. So, if you read my blog, all three of you, you've noticed that this past month I started a new project. Art project. I needed to get a hobby. I thought, I got to start doing something outside of church work and writing, so I'm going to draw. Except I picked this drawing by Rembrandt called Christ at Emmaus, because I just can't get away from Jesus, it seems. After buying the materials at Mona Lisa with the help of my artist daughter, Sarah, I decided to go in and try to replicate that. And I decided I would start with Jesus' face here, because I thought if I messed up the face, I don't know if I spent all that time on the other characters, only to have Jesus look like not Jesus. And the eyes were so hard to get right, especially with the pencil originally. I just kept doing them. And how the heck did Rembrandt do that with those few little strokes of his etching? And he captured something there. And as I was drawing them again and again and again, all of a sudden it became a kind of holy moment. And it was as though he was looking at me as I was drawing his eyes. looking at you in your life. And then I started to work on the hands, and I had a moment where I didn't really even see the hand with the bread on the original sketch, the etching. And then as I started to draw it, and you start to really look, and be attentive to his ways, Rembrandt's ways, trying to capture Jesus' ways, this hand reaching out toward me. And at one moment, I almost felt like grabbing it in response, and taking and eating and remembering and believing. He is reaching out to you in your life in places and in ways you may be missing, even though he's right there. And then last Monday, I started in on the first of the three characters, human characters, less the dog. Rembrandt always seems to have a dog in there. And this one character is probably not one of the two disciples who are on the sides of Jesus, who are astonished and they're getting who he is. This one appears to be walking down a set of stairs away from the scene. And it just struck me that this guy who's in the same room, this person who's in the same room as the other two who are getting what's going on and awestruck, knows there's something going on. What are those guys doing at that table? And he is walking away from the scene. And then I realized I started to lose it sitting in my Monday morning living room, that this is a microcosm of our world. There are people who know, some of us barely, mysteriously, a gift of grace. And then a whole bunch of people in the world who are looking at this, there's something there, but don't, and are walking right on by. And it broke my heart. That's why I'm a pastor for that guy. In Rembrandt's original etching, it's hard to tell when you look at the whole of it where Jesus is actually looking. It kind of looks like he's staring into space, not at either of the two beside him, nor at this character. But when I redrew it, I guess I didn't get the eyes totally right, because they're looking at him. And I thought that was a Freudian slip of the pen on my part. In this Emmaus Road moment, seeing Jesus for who he really is a kind of experience I believe every human being made in and through and for Jesus is meant for. To, by his Spirit, see Christ here, there, everywhere. And I have mentioned 3 or 4 times in sermons over the years, a time I led a workshop at Calvin in Grand Rapids on the idea of experiencing God everywhere. And after my talk, an Old Testament preaching professor came up to me and said, quote, "I think I see what you're doing. I've spent my entire life connecting the Jesus of the New Testament to the Jesus of the Old Testament. You are connecting the Jesus of the New Testament to the resurrected Jesus today." And ever since he named that reality, ever since he spoke those words, I have been dreaming about unpacking all of the different ways that Jesus is foreshadowed and foretold in the Old Testament, and then taking all of those ways or the principles of those ways and turning them out with us in our community to the world so that we can recognize those signature moves in our lives more and more and more. I mean, could it be that Jesus, the perfect prophet, he was a prophet, a priest, and a king, the perfect prophet who was recognizable in all that was true in the prophets of the Old Testament, that he could be glimpsed in the prophetic role that, say, a reporter or a journalist takes on in our world today, and that anytime they speak the truth, it's really God pointing us to the truth through them. Journalists report on the story of a God that speaks truths eloquently, circumstances sovereignly, movements of nations gently and imperceptibly. He moves economies and creates messes or allows messes to happen that he mysteriously works through as well, and he holds the whole physical universe together. And good storytellers and reporters and journalists tell the story of the nature of reality for what it is. And that is prophetic, to name reality for what it is. Like when Jesus said, look at the birds of the air, it's minus 20 when you got up this week, and there were birds outside of your house chirping. Look at the birds of the air, pointing to the nature of nature and its miraculous nature. Or when he said to the Pharisees and their hypocrisy, you brood of vipers, and called them on the carpet. Whenever you see a journalist doing those kinds of things, telling the story through a documentary like Planet Earth, or skewering a hypocritical pastor or church leader or politician, and whenever they get it right in doing those things, could it be that it is the Spirit of Jesus Christ at work in and through them, showing them the nature of nature, the reality of reality? A journalist is made in the image of a God who tells it like it is, eloquently, poignantly, beautifully, cuttingly, precisely. Tells the story of a Jesus who tells the story, of a Jesus who tells your story, of a Jesus who's authored your life. And the same kind of math plays out with Jesus being a high priest, and the perfect high priest, who was also foreshadowed through all of those high priestly functions in the Old Testament priesthood, and can be recognized anytime you see somebody operating in a priestly, mediatory, advocacy type role in your life. Could it be the signature moves of the great priest as seen in those places as well? So we have Gord and Annie Vanderleek in our church, and Fran and I knew them before our churches came together. And I still remember sitting in Gord's office doing wills, and what do I know about wills? And I'm not downloading a will and filling out a will because matters that it's right. And here I go into the office of somebody who knows that it matters, knows the way, has the forms, can work this out for you. You just put your life into his hands, and a will is prepared, and you sign it, and we're good, and there's peace and shalom, and I get to flourish a bit more and have rest in my life. Gord's signature moves as a lawyer point to a God who does the same, who has a plan for you in your life and after you die especially. And then Annie, his wife, what a combination. She does guardianship for people with children with disabilities. And so this is our most vulnerable point, Fran and I, right? Edward, and how do we, and are we doing the right thing, and how do we get guardianship? And we have no idea how to find a way through that. And Annie knows the way. She knows exactly where to go and how to fill out the form and who to present it to and what judge is going to look at this and what we need to say. And Annie, in that particular, she did everything for us, pointing to a God who does everything for us. And just to remind you, John and Fran, here's Annie and Gord. Jesus did it all for you. He is your advocate, your comforter, the one who brings you peace, who knows the plan, especially the life after death plan. According to the Bible, the Old Testament and the New, Jesus is also a king, prophet, priest, and king. And he was already present in all of the good and wise kings that showed up in all of those stories in Israel's history. And today, where you see good and wise and just right leadership or policies or decisions by your local mayor or premier or prime minister or president, he's there too. So this week, Jeff Loomis from our church, who runs an organization with a whole bunch of good people called Momentum, that is an advocacy group for people who need help, came alongside through Momentum our provincial political leaders, he did this over the previous years, to enact some predatory lending legislation, because that highway robbery that's happening in our province is wrong, and somebody ought to stand up and say it's wrong and do something. And so Momentum said, we'll do that, or we'll do our part. And they went to the province to Edmonton, and they talked to our leaders, and legislation was enacted, and it's not all gone yet, but it's a lot better than it was. Anyway, there was a little 4-minute video of one person whose life was kind of wrecked in a short-term way by predatory lenders, and is very thankful for this momentum group that would come alongside them and help and change the minds of leaders so that we could see the good and right and true and just mind of God in leadership, his kingly role. So watch the video. Go look for it on Twitter, Momentum's website. Anyway, what struck me this week and what's cool about the whole idea of signature moves is that they're moves. They're not just results, signature results, certain things that have to be in place in order for God to be there. It's the way a person is, the way you are, or that other person in this church who seems to make you feel like God is close. What are the distinctive, reliable, delightful ways that that person has of operating? So this Friday, and you knew it was coming, I was thinking a lot about the signature move of giving birth. 6 a.m., Friday morning, Franny gets a text. Our daughter Sarah is in labor, and she had a little baby girl named Fenna Beatrix Rose McCutcheon, my granddaughter, all smiles. That was a great moment. There were lots of great moments at that point. The 14 hours before, a little harder, a little more suffering. You know, I'm there, and she's sitting on this beautiful bed with white sheets in the labor and delivery room, and you look down at the floor, and you see blood dried on the floor, all over the floor. And childbirth is a signature move, a pointer to what life is really like, right, in our world today. So much beauty, so much goodness, so much grief, so much death, so much poverty, so much abuse of women, so much pain, so much psychological pain. Xenophobia rising everywhere, and racism and fighting and rumors of wars, and not the way it's supposed to be, and still hope and bits of light that shine through the cracks. Nation will rise against nation, said Jesus, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And all these are the beginning of birth pains. As the pregnant woman approaches the time to give birth, she writhes and cries out in her labor pains. Thus we were before you, O Lord. All around us we observe a pregnant creation. The difficult times of pain throughout the world are simply birth pangs. But it's not only around us, it's within us. And you know it, don't you? Like it just hurts, right? Or it's hard. And the difficulty is doing something. God is through that in you. The Spirit of God is arousing us within. We're also feeling the birth pangs. These sterile and barren bodies of ours are yearning for full deliverance. That is why waiting does not diminish us any more than waiting diminishes a pregnant mother. We are enlarged in the waiting. We, of course, don't see what is enlarging us, but the longer we wait, the larger we become, and the more joyful our expectancy. And that is where we're at. He's here now, but he's not yet here fully. And we're in the middle, the messy, gray, mysterious middle. And I've been feeling it on and off, but lately in our church, the tension of that middle and pain for some people. And it's hard to come together as two churches. And it's hard to deal with that other person who's so like that. And it's hard to be stretched the way we're being stretched. But I am convinced that God is birthing and enlarging us for a birth that is beautiful and good, ultimately beautiful and good one day. But even in our time here, if we can wait and deal with the stretching feelings of our preferences and characters and hearts, I think he's teaching us to be attentive. We talked at a leadership retreat a year and a half ago about it being the number one thing for this church, if you believe in the vision of this church, is to teach people how to be attentive to the world. And I was thinking about this waiting, stretching, attentive. Like that is a stretching way of upping our attentiveness, our persevering, waiting, attending hearts. And the longer we wait, the larger we're becoming, and the more joyful our expectancy. Every time a child comes into this world via the signature move of childbirth, we see a microcosm of God's plan for the cosmos. Every time we're enlarged in the waiting, we're experiencing his providence. We're all waiting for salvation to come. We're all waiting for that death to lead to resurrection, to come to its fulfillment, and for our lives and for our lives to be made new. And we're all part of God's suffering in the midst of and before the birth story, and before the death and resurrection story. Just like all those people in the Bible where we saw the story repeat, signature move, signature move, signature move, over and over again. And all of those people that have filled history in the last 2,000 years, and we've seen God's signature moves repeating again and again and again and again. And all of the people that fill our planet right now, its pages, all of us waiting for rebirth. These sterile and barren bodies of ours, Paul writes, are yearning for full deliverance. We're all waiting.
Sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship your holy name. Worship your holy name. Worship your holy name.